My name is Jake, and my better half's name is Emily. We've made our home in the area right where the Sierra Nevada foothills start to rise in Mariposa, California, a stone's throw from the kind of wilderness that most people only see in magazines. We're high school sweethearts who never outgrew that urge to roam the trails and find peace in the untamed parts of nature, especially Yosemite National Park. We are avid hikers, especially on weekends in the winter months. We've had many interesting experiences over the years, but this one was particularly strange, and I want to share it with you. It happened during a late February hike on a well-known trail in Yosemite. We arrived at the parking area around 9 a.m. The temperature was about 50 Fahrenheit with clear skies. There were several inches of snow on the ground, though there had been no new snowfall for about a week. As we started our hike, we noticed fresh tracks in the snow ahead of us that appeared to be from two people walking side by side, which seemed odd because it looked like they were wearing shoes rather than hiking boots. There hadn't been any other cars parked at the lot when we arrived, so whoever made these tracks must have walked quite some distance to get here. The trail starts off as an old logging road and then turns into single track after about a half mile. The fresh tracks continued along this section of trail for another quarter mile before veering off into some dense underbrush. They seemed to be following what appeared to be an animal track at first, but then deviated from it shortly thereafter. The thing is, my wife and I couldn't figure out why anyone would venture off trail in such frigid temperatures without proper gear, unless they knew something we didn't. It was obvious that these tracks were very recent due to the lack of any kind of drifting or wind-blown effect on them. At this point, my curiosity got the better of me, so my wife and I decided to follow them for just a bit. But we ended up following those footprints for almost 3 miles through some pretty rough terrain, including steep hillsides covered with thick brush and fallen trees. We eventually lost sight of them near a large boulder field, which we could tell was also the home to bear dens, where we saw sows and cubs back in June. In fact, just a few hundred yards past the boulders, there's a small stream where my wife spotted bobcats drinking last summer. As we pressed on past the boulder field, we noticed a shift in the atmosphere around us. It was a feeling that's hard to describe, like the forest had gone silent, and even the light seemed to dim a bit, which is odd, right? Because it was midday, and the sun was supposed to be at its highest. That's when we heard a series of deep thuds in the distance, not like the sound of an animal bounding away, which we're used to, but something heavier, purposeful. We exchanged glances, and without saying a word, agreed to cautiously move toward the sound. We weaved through the thickets and towering pines until we reached a small clearing. That's where we saw it. Standing across from us on the other side was... it wasn't a person. It wasn't a bear either. This thing was massive, easily standing over 7 feet tall. Its broad shoulders were covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to blend with the trees behind it. The face was partly obscured by long strands of hair, but what we could see of the skin was weathered and gray. Its eyes, though, they were the most human-like, full of intelligence and a hint of curiosity as they met ours. We stood there, rooted to the spot, and for a second, it felt like the creature was sizing us up just as we were it. There was this mutual recognition, a silent understanding that we were all out of our usual elements. Then, as calmly as you'd imagine, it turned and took strides towards the denser woods, each step deliberate, leaving deep impressions in the snow. We could hear branches snapping as it moved through the forest, but it never looked back. That encounter stuck with us for the rest of our hike, and long after, to be honest. We didn't talk much on the way back. What was there to say? We just hiked back, listening to the crunch of snow beneath our boots and the occasional distant call of a bird. And when we got back to our car, the parking lot was still empty. We drove home with the image of the creature etched firmly in our minds, not sure of what we had seen, but knowing it was something we'd never forget. so I've always steered clear of ghost tales and all that paranormal jazz. I mean, I believe there's something out there, but I don't just bring it up, especially not around skeptics, because the communication can go south really quick. But man, I gotta tell you about this one time. It left me all kinds of messed up. It's not exactly the kind of story you normally tell, but I want you to know about it anyway. I'm an attorney, set up my practice down in Fort Lauderdale, South Florida. My girl, she lives a good stretch away, up by Daytona Beach. She's been balancing plates as a waitress at this swanky joint while studying accounting part-time. We had this plan to hang out last weekend since her work was letting her off for spring break. Apparently, some of the college kids were home and picking up shifts. She didn't mind, and the weather was nailing it all week, just perfect for a getaway. We figured we'd camp out on Saturday at this out-of-the-way spot, over on Hutchinson Island, St. Lucie County. Come Friday, though, things got a little weird. My girlfriend rings me up from her landline, which isn't totally out of the blue. She prefers it to her cell for long talks. But she's all, "Hey, my cell's on the fritz." I'm like, "What's up with it?" She tells me it's just freaking out ever since she got out of class, making these bizarre sounds and all. She said the data part is fine, but the cell part isn't connecting. Problem is that she's stopping at her mom's before meeting me at our camping spot and won't be able to get in touch with me as easily while there or during her drive down to meet me. So we chew on the idea of pushing our trip back since we can't exactly call each other, but we were both itching for a break and to see each other. She pitches this plan to use texts and emails to keep in touch while we're apart since her data is okay. Might sound obvious to some young folk, but we're older and didn't grow up using cell phones, and so we're more used to calling. Anyway, Saturday rolls around and I'm up packing my Jeep Cherokee. It's early morning and I've got our tents, bags, a stove, cooler, the works, and I hit the road just as dawn's breaking. We're talking a 100-mile gap between me and the park, so I pull into a gas station in West Palm Beach along the turnpike for a fill-up. I also send her a text to let her know I'm on my way, but I can't get it to go through. I figured I must be in a dead spot. It's dark, quiet, just a handful of cars milling around at this time of day. The guy pumping my gas, he's got this thick Caribbean accent. He's like, "Heading out for some fun?" I'm all, "Yeah, a camping trip." And he drops this on me. "Be careful. It's that time of year when things get weird around here." I thought he was talking about the spring break crowd getting rowdy, but I didn't press him on it though. I cruise along A1A heading to the park, and it's peaceful as can be. Just a couple of surfers out there testing the waters. When I arrive at the park, I keep going till I hit our spot. This secluded slice of beach they don't keep up, and so not many people head here. I check my phone to see if I have a text and notice that mine still hasn't gone through, but that I've received about 10 texts. None from my girlfriend, and all of them just filled with gibberish from a number I don't recognize. Again, I just figure I'm in a weird dead spot and continue setting up. Setting up didn't take more than a quarter hour. I wasn't rushing and was just waiting on my girlfriend to arrive. The sun's up by now, lighting up everything. Soon enough, she arrives and we settle in. Eventually, I mentioned trying to contact her, but my phone not working. Something weird going on with it. She says she never got anything, and it's strange that her phone is acting up too. But we just go on with our day. Later, after a day full of beach stuff, swimming, fishing, catching rays, we cook up dinner, then hunker down in our tent as night takes over. Come 9:30, we're just shooting the breeze under our sleeping bags when both our laptops start pinging with email notifications at the same time. We lock eyes like, "You hearing this too?" But then it stops, nothing else. Kind of freaked us out, and we just start joking about hackers or even aliens hitting us up on email. We crashed out good that night, woke up with the sun peeking over the Atlantic. We spend the majority of the day on the island just strolling around and being in nature and purposely not glued to our phones. Eventually, the day gets late enough that we need to leave. The next day is Monday and I have to work and she has class. We pack up and rolled back towards civilization, but decide to stop for a quick bite to eat at this beachside spot in Jensen Beach before we each go our separate ways. I brought my laptop in to check out the mysterious pinging from the night before. I fire it up and my girlfriend's all, "What do you think went down?" I'm shrugging it off. Some glitch, probably. But when I open Outlook, it's showing 2 new emails that are strange, one from me but sent to her, and another from her sent to mine. And remember to keep in mind that we both heard these arriving at the same time, and we were together and didn't do it. We're staring at each other like, what in the world? No clue how it happened or who'd pull something like that. She's whispering, "Let's keep this to ourselves." I'm asking, why? There's no reason to keep it a secret. But she's serious. Who's gonna believe us? So now we're sitting here, wondering if it was just some prank or hacker, or if we stumbled onto something more. We can't say for sure, but whatever it was, it's got us believing now in powers that are stronger than ours. So I hope you find this interesting enough, but we feel it's strange enough that you'd want to know. As a park ranger at Yosemite National Park, I've always had a deep love and respect for the natural world. There's something about the majestic mountains, cascading waterfalls, and diverse array of wildlife that I just love. But lately, I've had a feeling that something is off here. It's hard to explain, but it's like a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something is not right. I've tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but the feeling persists. I was on my usual rounds one day, checking on the various hiking trails and making sure everything was in order. As I was walking through the dense forest, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a cross between a growl and a snarl, and it seemed to be coming from just ahead of me on the trail. I cautiously approached, my hand hovering over my radio, prepared to call for backup. As I peered through the trees, I saw something I could not explain. It was a creature that was unlike anything I'd ever seen in the park, let alone anywhere. It was covered in thick, shaggy fur and had a lupine head and glowing red eyes. Its body was muscular and powerful, and it stood on 2 legs like a human. But there was something off about it, something almost otherworldly. I froze, unsure of what to do. I'd heard of strange sightings in the park before, but I had always assumed that they were just hoaxes, or the result of people seeing things in the shadows. But this was different. This creature was real, and it was right in front of me. I slowly backed away, trying to keep my movements slow and steady so as not to startle the creature. But as I turned to run, it let out a deafening roar, and it lunged at me. I sprinted back down the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get to safety and alert the other rangers. I radioed for backup and headed back to the visitor center as quickly as I could. When I arrived, I was panting and out of breath, but I managed to get out a garbled explanation of what I had seen. The other rangers looked at me with skepticism, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew that if what I was saying was true, it could be a major problem for the park. We decided to send out a team to investigate and see if we could find any trace of the creature. I volunteered to go despite my own fear. I had to know what this thing was and how it had come to be in the park. We searched the area intensely where I'd seen the creature, but we found no sign of it. We searched for hours, but it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And then as the sun began to set, we called off the search and headed back to the visitor center. I was exhausted and disheartened, but I knew we couldn't give up. We had to find out what this thing was and stop it from affecting the park. Over the next few days, we searched intently. I know it's impossible, but it sure felt like we searched almost every inch of the area where I was. But we still didn't find any trace. It was like it never even existed. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that it was real, and I couldn't shake the feeling. So then as the weeks went by, the feeling only grew stronger. And then one night I heard the same growl that I had heard before, but this time it was coming from outside my cabin, and it was louder and more menacing than ever. I knew that I had to act fast. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio and I stepped outside, ready to face whatever was out there. And that's when I saw it again. The creature was back, and it was even more terrifying to me than before. It was too close now, too close for comfort. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its fur bristled as it let out its deafening roar. But this time I was prepared. I shone my flashlight directly into its eyes, hoping to blind it temporarily. And as it stumbled backwards, I grabbed my radio and I called for backup. Within minutes, the other rangers arrived, and we were able to surround the creature with the intentions of capturing it and securing both it and the park. However, it put up a fierce fight, one that took over an hour of intense teamwork on our end. And in the end, we were unfortunately unable to contain it. The creature overpowered us and took off back into the wilderness. All we could do was watch as it headed away. The safety of the park is still a concern, though. We did inform our supervisors, and they assured us that they would take the proper steps to ensure the park was not a danger. However, since that day, I've heard no further updates. And when I ask, I'm just told that things are being taken care of. I'm not sure what will happen going forward, but I'm happy to know that it was my intuition telling me that something was wrong in the park. And it was up to me, as a park ranger, to do something about it. To be honest, that's what keeps me going. Western Pennsylvania, April 2018. I'm a professional photographer. I have been for 8 years now, and I love it. I shoot weddings, engagement photos, family portraits, and more. I've gone all over the city and the tri-state region in that time, finding cool places to serve as backdrops for photos. Sometimes the clients show me new places too, and I use them again later if they provide a good aesthetic. I'll go pretty much anywhere. Abandoned buildings and overgrown areas make for really interesting pictures, so I go there a lot, as do remote parks and industrial areas. The only place I won't go, though, is the old abandoned tunnel. The tunnel was part of a now unused railroad, 20 miles outside of Pittsburgh. People go there a lot for pictures these days, especially since Instagram became popular. The tunnel's covered in colorful graffiti and it's overgrown with trees and vines. It's actually an amazing spot. But after my last trip there, I refused to ever go back. I went out one spring day for an engagement shoot. The couple had specifically chosen the tunnel, and I was familiar with it, so I agreed. We did a few other sites first, and then I met them out there late in the afternoon for the best lighting. We picked a good spot and started working. Everything was running smoothly at first, until we started hearing the sounds. They were coming from somewhere inside the tunnel. It was long enough that it was dark in the middle, so we couldn't see anything past a few hundred yards. But we could hear some noises, like something or someone was moving around in there. We tried to ignore it, and I just kept taking pictures. But the noises got louder, as if whatever was creating them was coming closer to us. The couple was now more uncomfortable, and they looked tense in the pictures. So I suggested wrapping it up, but they wanted to finish. I got in another 10 shots before we heard the growling. I stopped shooting, and we all stared into the tunnel, petrified. I'd been operating under the assumption that there was a small animal in there, like a raccoon or a possum. The sounds had been unsettling, but not actually concerning. But the growling meant something very different. It sounded large and threatening. At the very least, a stray dog or maybe even a coyote. But given the growling, it clearly didn't like us in the area. We were very isolated out there, so aside from our cars, we had no means of protection or self-defense. With a quick discussion, we decided to leave and go to a backup location. I started packing my lenses as they went to their car. My hands were shaking as I packed. The growling continued and sounded as if it was getting closer and closer, along with now a scraping sound. Panicked, I grabbed my stuff and ran for the car. I got in and immediately locked the doors. The couple was already pulling out, but I had parked facing the other way and needed to turn around. As I did, there was a brief second where my running lights shone into the tunnel entrance. In that second, I saw it, the source of the sound. It was huge, definitely not a stray dog, and many times larger than a German Shepherd. And it was standing on its hind legs, although it was bent forward awkwardly. Even bent forward, it was nearly 7 feet tall. The head was covered in thick fur, and it had dog-like ears sticking up on the top of its head. I couldn't see the features clearly because it was too far away, but I saw the eyes. They reflected in the light this disturbingly deep orangish-red color. It made my hair stand up on the back of my neck. As I made my turn, it opened its mouth in a growl. I couldn't hear it inside the car, but I could imagine it. I'd absolutely no idea what I was seeing. But it walked on 2 legs, then I blinked, and it was gone. On autopilot, I followed the couple for 10 minutes to a park that they had also suggested. When we got out, I asked them if they had seen the thing in the tunnel, but they said they hadn't. I debated telling them exactly what it was, but it sounded too crazy. Even though they had heard the growling, I knew they would not understand what I had seen. So I told them I wasn't sure what I saw. We finished their session as fast as we could. A few days later, I was sorting through their photos, and I got to those tunnel photos. Most of them were normal, but although, as I had predicted, most were not usable because they were too tense and uncomfortable in their poses. I looked through them carefully, trying to find the best ones to include, not wanting the location to be a total loss. In the last few images, I saw something weird. It looked like a glare or a light flare over the guy's shoulder. I zoomed in and played with the lighting until I saw it more clearly. It was not a lens flare. It was eyes. 2 orange eyes in the darkness of the tunnel. They appeared in each of the last 10 photos, and it was proof of what I had seen. The creature in the tunnel was real. My heart was pounding as I started removing the photos from their package. I couldn't include those, not knowing what it was behind them. As I removed the last photo, I spotted something else unusual. Not inside the tunnel, but off to the side. There were trees on both sides of the tunnel. They'd grown up around it since the tunnel had been abandoned. And there, on the side, just near the entrance, was something brown. It looked like an arm. I zoomed in once again and saw that it was clearly an arm and a hand, long and lightly hairy, tipped with curved claws. There had been 2 of them. I wish I had been closer to everything that happened. I wish I knew more. If I had been closer, though, I might not have the privilege of sharing this story. They might have realized that I was there, and I saw it happen. They might not have even let me quit my job and stay alive. Up until a year ago, I worked for a very prominent corporation. My role was a small one, just delivering orders in a timely 2-day fashion. I covered the northern half of a sprawling American city. I can't give out too many details, I'm sorry. Proper nouns are how people get caught. Most of my deliveries went out to businesses. Very rarely did I travel into the suburbs to make residential drops. My days were fairly routine. I arrived at the distribution center at 4 a.m., loaded my blue van, and headed into the city. Deliveries took all day to complete, and every day was basically the same. And then, one day, my routine changed, and that was the moment I knew that something was wrong. After loading my truck, I was stopped by one of my supervisors. He handed me an additional box, and he asked if I would take it around with me. There was no label, no address describing where the box was going to or coming from. It wasn't paid for by any type of postage or stamp. It was an unremarkable box, half the size of a basketball. The cardboard packaging was colored black, and I had never seen a box quite like it. When I asked where the package was going, my supervisor just waved me off. They assured me that it wasn't a delivery. I simply needed to carry the box with me along my route. They promised that other drivers had done so in the past. It was simply my turn, they explained. They said the box hadn't seen the northern half of the city just yet. Now, the way they described that was concerning. The way they said the box hadn't seen the city. I figured they had just misspoken, but I never clarified, thinking it was just a simple mistake. In my mind, they were testing some new GPS product that would likely be installed in our vehicles in the future, and they were keeping it in the box to keep anybody from tampering with it. The bonus they told me about, if I completed this trip without damage to the package, was more than enough to seal the deal for me. So I drove around with my little black box. I kept it with me on the passenger seat. I wanted to have my eyes on it, obviously. When I stopped for lunch, I started to doubt my GPS theory, though, because after spending time with it, I could tell that the package was humming. As I was sitting there in my seat, working my way through a slice of pizza, I kept glancing over at the box, and I almost jumped out of the van when it vibrated. I nearly dropped my slice, and for a few seconds I was convinced that I had been tricked into smuggling a bomb on board my van. When it didn't explode, I figured I was overreacting because it stopped humming once I finished my meal. In my mind, I joked with myself that the box was just hungry, envious of my lunch break. Either that or else it was impatient and wanted to get back on the road. For some reason, that idea stuck with me. Was this package keeping its own schedule? I then returned back to the distribution facility at the end of the day, and a different supervisor retrieved the box from my vehicle. They thanked me for a job well done and carried the package out of sight. As I handed it to them, I asked what it was. I even pitched my GPS theory. The question earned me a glare and a long period of silence. I quickly apologized and left for the day. That reaction now had me determined, though. I was now wanting to find out what was inside that box. I spoke to the other drivers, and I learned pretty quickly which of them had already given the box a tour of their delivery route. So that narrowed down who would be escorting the package next. I kept my eye on those drivers who would be next. I then watched as one of them received the box and drove it around without incident. The next driver, however, was not so lucky. I arrived at the facility early that afternoon. I had rushed through my deliveries and skipped lunch so that I could arrive before this next driver. I wanted to see him hand off the box. Instead, when he pulled in, I watched as he jumped out of his driver's seat, screaming. I kept my distance. I ducked into my own van and I hunched down a bit behind the windshield. I wanted to watch as best as I could, but I did not want to get caught. I watched as the frantic driver was tackled by security. I didn't even know we had security that could deal with that kind of thing. They pinned him to the ground and bound his hands, and might I say that they looked very professional while doing it. That driver was then carried away, hogtied. I guess they even knocked him unconscious somehow. And then next I watched as my supervisors rushed into his truck and brought out the box. I could see from my seat that the black cardboard had been torn open. They were all obviously scared. They were all on their cell phones and moving so hurriedly that I wasn't surprised when two of them collided. This caused the box to fall, and I could see something tumble out. It was shaped like a small pyramid. Most of it was silver, the color of steel, and the way the light hit it, I'm confident that it was metal. But what I could not understand were the veins. These thin green streaks ran across the surface of this pyramid thing. It looked like a leaf or thinly stretched skin. The streaks were pulsating too, throbbing. Watching it made my head ache. Whatever it was scooped back into its box, and the team of supervisors all scurried off to their offices. Someone was going to be upset with them, I could tell. But I could also tell that the pyramid thing was not ours. It didn't look like any piece of technology that I had ever seen, and plenty had passed through my hands. When the other driver, the one who broke the box, didn't come back to work, I knew something was very wrong. I knew my company was hiding something. I instantly decided to quit, and I let things get quiet. But your channel, Lilith, has given me a unique opportunity. I've taken all the measures I need to stay safe. And I think that you and your followers deserve to know about this. You can spread the word, and you can warn others without endangering me. I think the big corporations out there are working for somebody else. Maybe the government, maybe something even bigger. I think that they're driving around and scanning our cities. I think they're preparing for something, and I don't know what it is. I just know that if I stay silent, none of us will be ready for it. I had a really strange experience last night that has left me very unsettled. I'm not sure what it was that happened to me, but your channel seems like the best place to get some answers. I live in North Central Florida and have always been fascinated by all things paranormal and cryptid related. My mother is from Romania, so growing up she would tell me stories about werewolves, vampires, and other monsters that lived in her country, things she heard about when she was a young girl. I do a lot of hiking in the Ocala National Forest, which is just 10 minutes from my home. It's an incredibly beautiful area with many springs and clear water lakes filled with fish. The trail system there goes on for hundreds of miles, with numerous campsites available if you want to spend the night deep within the forest where no one will bother you. My mom worries about me going out alone at times, but this is my favorite way to relax after work or on weekends, especially during springtime when everything is blooming. The trails are well marked here, so even though it can be easy to lose track of time since they go on forever, you're never really lost. As far as animals go, we don't really have wolves or bears around these parts, although we did have a bear sighting recently, but plenty of deer, raccoons, and opossums, along with smaller critters such as squirrels. So now let's get into what happened last night. It was around 6 p.m. when I got off work early. As soon as I saw the rain outside, which I loved being out in, my first thought was, I should head over towards Juniper Springs. This spot offers shelter under trees near small creeks running through sandbars, making it the perfect place to set up camp while staying dry from rain. I had my gear ready, and I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I arrived at Juniper Springs just as the heavy rains started coming down hard, which actually made it difficult for me to find a spot with enough cover so that I could set up camp. I finally found an area under some trees next to one of the creeks running through sandbars, but unfortunately, there was no way for me to stay completely dry without getting wet in certain areas. As nightfall approached around 8 p.m., everything seemed calm outside except for occasional thunderclaps off in the distance, along with lightning flashes lighting up the sky every now and then. Call me crazy, but I really enjoyed this weather. My plan was to go to bed early because being alone during stormy weather can be tiring if you're not used to it. Plus, there's always the possibility of encountering wildlife, such as snakes or other animals, while walking around after dark here. Once inside my tent, all seemed peaceful until around midnight when I heard what sounded like someone whispering nearby, followed by soft tapping sounds against the canvas wall directly behind where my head lay. It took a moment to realize this wasn't normal noises. Even though I felt unnerved, I decided to ignore it and try to get back to sleep. Well, things escalated pretty quickly after that because I soon began hearing low growling noises right outside the tent, along with scratching on the fabric above the foot area. I instantly went into survival mode, grabbing a flashlight, which always kept close by, unzipping the tent and turning towards the sound source, pointing the beam at the part where growls came from. At first, I couldn't see anything, except the shadows of tree branches. Seconds later, I caught a glimpse of a large figure moving between trees about 15 feet away. This thing looked massive, its silhouette revealing an outline of a shaggy body resembling a bear or dog. yet something felt off about the shape itself. It didn't look quite right. Despite the fact that it appeared hunched over similar to how a bear would stand on all fours, this creature seemed to have long limbs with thick muscles that bulged out from underneath matted fur, making me think more along the lines of a werewolf than anything else. Around this time, I started feeling an overwhelming dread wash over my entire body, like someone had dumped a bucket full of icy water down my back, causing my hair, neck, and arms to stand up on end. It was terrifying, especially considering that I felt completely helpless due to being trapped inside a tent during a stormy night. I tried to stay calm, knowing that if I let fear take control, I wouldn't be able to think clearly enough to come up with a plan to escape the situation, should the worst happen. It was at this point that I noticed more of them standing near the first one I had seen. It's difficult to explain exactly what these things look like, but the heads were shaped similar to wolves, yet different. This additional group also seemed much smaller compared to the first one that I had seen earlier, possibly cubs or something. The sounds coming from the group included yelping, barking, and growling noises, along with heavy breathing. Fortunately for me, I remained focused on my task, which was escaping unharmed regardless of how unlikely the odds appeared to be stacked against me. After a few minutes, I heard a low whining sound followed by a series of loud snaps echoing through the forest, indicating something large was moving towards me. Suddenly, several sets of glowing yellow eyes came into view, which confirmed my suspicions about the presence of additional creatures standing just beyond my view. After that, everything happened so quickly that I barely remember how I got out or where I ran next. All I know is that I was able to get away from that spot as fast as humanly possible, given the conditions. Once I felt safe enough, I stopped to catch my breath behind a large tree. It was a surreal experience unlike anything I ever encountered during my life to this point. So here I am writing a letter, hoping someone else has seen similar things around these parts, especially the Ocala National Forest. I'm desperate to find answers. I need to understand what I witnessed. I hope to hear back soon since I really don't want to feel alone anymore. And by the way, this encounter just took place last night. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Dear Lilith, I've been a fan of your site for a while now and have always enjoyed reading the accounts that people send in. That being said, I never thought I would be writing one myself. Forgive me if this email is long, but there's no way to tell my story without giving you all the details. I am an avid hiker and spend most weekends exploring trails throughout our beautiful state parks here in Ohio. My favorite spot is Hocking Hills State Park because it has so many different trails to choose from depending on what type of hike you want. Wooded areas, caves, waterfalls, etc. It was about 3 weeks ago when this happened. The day started out normal enough as my friend John and I set off down one of the lesser-known trails at Hocking Hills called Rock House Trail. This trail takes you through some pretty wooded areas before eventually leading to Rock House, which is basically a large cave system with lots of small rooms inside. We had been hiking for about 2 hours when we reached Rock House, where we stopped to rest for a while. After resting up, we decided to continue along the trail instead of heading back like most people do after reaching Rock House. Now at this point, let me explain something. I have seen plenty of weird things while hiking, such as unexplained noises or lights in the sky, but none were truly frightening until now. So anyway, John and I continued on past Rock House along another part of the trail, which leads into an even denser area than before, full of trees with barely any sunlight getting through. As soon as we entered this area, both John and I got an eerie feeling like someone was watching us, although neither one mentioned anything at first. About halfway through this dense section, something strange began happening. We started hearing whispers all around us coming from seemingly nowhere. Sometimes they were louder than others, but never loud enough that we could make out what they were saying. just random words every now and then. At first, we both thought it was just our imagination playing tricks on us, but as the whispers continued and got louder, we knew something wasn't right. We stopped for a minute to try and figure out where they were coming from, but it was impossible to tell because they seemed to be all around us. As we stood there listening, one particular whisper caught my attention. It said, "Get out," very clearly. That's when I told John that maybe we should leave before whatever is causing this decides to show itself. After agreeing with me, he took off, running back down the trail towards Rock House, while I followed close behind. About halfway back, however, I tripped over a tree root or something, which caused me to fall into some thorny bushes. As soon as I hit the ground, an overwhelming sense of dread came over me like nothing else ever had before. It felt like every ounce of energy had been drained from my body in an instant, leaving me completely helpless. I lay there in those bushes for what felt like hours, although it could have only been seconds, until suddenly everything went quiet. The whispers had stopped. Just as quickly, things went from bad to worse when I heard what sounded like someone running towards me through the woods. This terrified me even more than anything else so far, because not only did I still feel completely drained of energy, but now whoever or whatever was coming at me would surely get here long before I could escape. The footsteps kept getting closer and closer until finally they reached where John was standing, looking down at his phone and checking messages instead of watching where he was going. Now keep in mind that up until this point, neither one of us had actually seen anything strange other than hearing those whispers. Then, out of nowhere, a loud crack rang out through the trees, causing both John and myself to jump. Looking around, trying to figure out what made that noise, another loud crack sounded off, followed by branches snapping above our heads. I looked up just in time to see a large branch come crashing down directly on top of John, knocking him out cold. I yelled his name a few times, trying to wake him up, but he didn't respond. It took about 10 minutes trying to revive him, but he finally opened his eyes and was able to slowly stand up. I decided it was time for us to get the hell out of there. As we turned to leave, though, something caught my eye in the bushes off to my right. A tall, dark figure stood there watching us from only about 10 feet away. It looked like a man at first glance, but upon closer inspection, I could see that this thing had no face, just an empty void where its head should be. Without wasting another second staring at it, I got us back as fast as possible down the trail towards Rock House. When I finally reached Rock House and saw other people walking around nearby, I felt safe enough again for the moment, although what happened still haunts me to this day. We got John to the emergency room where he was diagnosed with a concussion and spent the next week in bed with the lights dimmed. The whole experience lasted maybe 5 minutes total, yet it seemed like hours. Everything that happened defied all logic and reason, leaving me with more questions than answers. What were those whispers? Who or what knocked John unconscious? And most importantly, what was that thing standing in the bushes watching us? I have been back hiking since then because being outdoors is one of my passions. However, nothing has ever come close to comparing what occurred during that hike. Thank you for reading my email and keep up the good work. I'm a fire specialist with the Department of Natural Resources in a northwestern state, but I'm not comfortable saying which state. In case anybody out there is not familiar with that title, a fire specialist is just like a regular firefighter, except that we only deal with fires that happen in our parks and game lands. I'm the type of guy who just clocks in, does what he's told, clocks out at the end of the day, and leaves it behind. Life's too short to dwell on your job after you punch that clock. But recently, something happened on the job that really disturbed me. I've been back and forth over whether I should say anything. My wife says no, that I should leave it be. but I think the people have a right to know. One of our state forests here is very large and very popular. It's a great place for fishing and camping, and it gets pretty crowded in the good weather. A buddy of mine is a ranger there. We were having a few beers one night, and he told me that there had been a rash of Bigfoot sightings in the park. Now you might laugh, but I didn't, and neither did he. It's more common than you think for people to see strange things in the forest, at least around here. While I personally have never seen anything that looked like a Bigfoot, there's been times I've been in the woods and felt like something was watching me. And mind you, that's even happened after an area has been evacuated of the general public, like when we're about to do a controlled burn. Now, when my buddy told me that, I just asked him if anybody had managed to get any pictures. We're all waiting for that day, when somebody finally snaps a picture and proves the existence of these things. He said no, but he and one of the other rangers decided to set up game cameras right in the same area that people had reported seeing the creature. I didn't think too much of it, just said, cool, keep me posted, and we moved on to another subject. Then, about a week later, he calls me, all excited, and he says they did it. They got an image. I was stunned. He said it was pretty clear and no one would be able to say it was fake. So of course I wanted to see it. He told me to come on by the station whenever I could get over there. It's about an hour away. Well, we had some family stuff come up right after that, or I would have gone immediately. Nothing serious, but family comes first. It was 5 days later when I finally called my friend and told him I'd like to come by in about 2 days. That was my next day off. I had to leave a voicemail because he didn't pick up his phone. Then the evening before I was supposed to go and see him, I got a call from my supervisor. He instructed me to report the next day to the regional office for a controlled burn. I said, "What? That's my day off. There were no wildfires going on, so why pull me in?" He said it was non-negotiable, and that was that. He didn't give any details, just said I would find out more at the regional office. So, that stunk, but whatever. I showed up there the next day with 5 guys, and we were given the specifics. I was shocked. We were going to burn a whopping 500 acres, based on a spur-of-the-moment decision. I bet you can guess where, too. That's right. They were having us do a ping-pong ball drop right smack over the area that had all of the Bigfoot sightings. A ping-pong ball drop is when we fly over with a PSD dispenser on board. It injects glycol into a plastic sphere that contains potassium permanganate, and then it shoots it out of a helicopter. The combination triggers a thermogenic reaction, igniting the area in a flash. The only other times I've ever been involved in a ping-pong ball drop was when an area was already on fire. It's safer than going in on foot. I'd never seen it used for prescribed burn around here before, but we did it. 500 acres went up in flames, and I couldn't help but wonder if the reason was that they found out that the Bigfoot creature was really in there. I tried calling my friend, wanting to get his take on it. I kept getting his voicemail, and he never called me back. So I finally had a day off, and I went over to the park that he worked at. There was a new guy there that I had never met before, and he said my friend had been transferred, but he didn't know where. This whole thing reeks to me of a cover-up. Last time I talked to him, he was excited about how he and another ranger had finally gotten some pictures of the creature. I wish he had told me that guy's name, the last name at least, though I wouldn't be surprised if he was transferred too. Anyway, I wrote him a letter telling him about the ping-pong ball drop. I didn't say too much, just in case the letter ever gets intercepted, but I wanted him to know, in case he didn't already. I figured his mail will get forwarded to wherever he's living now. All I can think is maybe he's avoiding me. Maybe because he was told not to talk about the picture. It would take a pretty serious threat, though, for him to stay quiet. He's a pretty hard-headed guy. I guess that's all I have to say, except now, whenever I'm told to do a controlled burn, I'm going to wonder if there's an ulterior motive. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, July 2022. I used to be a canvasser for a consumer protection organization. For those who don't know what that means, a canvasser is somebody who walks around town, going door to door, knocking on strangers' doors with a clipboard to ask for donations or spread awareness for a specific cause. The cause we were all working on was pipelines, and the governor's lack of commitment to limit pipelines and new oil and gas infrastructure in the state. As you might imagine, it's a tough job, both physically because we walked about 10 miles a day, and emotionally because the most common response was a door shut in your face. Also, I've been threatened with a gun. I've been hit on by a clearly naked person, and I've had the cops called on me more than my fair share. But honestly, I kind of get it. We are interrupting these people at home without their permission, as late as 8:30 at night. We are strangers, and I specifically am a rather large, bearded man. I wouldn't harm a fly, and I consider myself rather jovial and carefree, but random people don't know that when they see me walking up to their house. So again, I get some of their more extreme reactions to a certain extent. One night, though, and I'll never forget this, I got the crap scared out of me. I knocked on a door and nobody answered. Next house. I knocked on the door and chatted with a nice guy for a few minutes. And although this didn't result in any donations or anybody signing up to become a member of the organization, I always appreciated nice small talk chats to break up the monotony of perpetual rejection. Finally, I came up to one of the last houses on my route. It looked like it used to be a grandiose, almost Gatsby-esque house, but it had fallen into disrepair. I knocked on the door, and in an instant it swung open. This woman with large, glassy black eyes and a full face of wrinkles, wearing a white nightgown with messy white hair, was staring right at me. She stared at me so intensely that it felt like her eyes could cut right through me and leave a hole in the sidewalk behind me. Her eyes were lifeless. I gulped audibly. I didn't even know until that moment that that was a real thing people do when they're scared. But I gulped. I managed to open my mouth and just barely squeak out, "Hi, ma'am," when the door swung shut in front of me so hard I thought it might break. While this might sound like a normal encounter on paper, there was something so intense, so unnerving about that woman's empty stare that it set me on edge the rest of the night. Honestly, I would have never told my boss this. I just filled out the rest of my sheet saying that everybody else was not home, so that I wouldn't have to keep working. I took out my phone to watch YouTube or maybe text my friends, anything to take my mind off that woman, but I had no signal, so I just decided to walk around a bit. As I walked along the empty streets, I realized that there is something creepy about the suburbs when you're the only one on the street and all the house lights are off. When it's quiet and still like that, you realize you feel exposed. And then every horror movie you've ever seen comes back to you, and you imagine that Freddy Krueger's right behind you, poised to attack. I kept walking down those empty streets looking for any sign of life so that I could feel better. I knew my boss wasn't picking me up with the van for another 20 minutes, and trust me when I tell you, I knew that was going to be the longest 20 minutes of my life. I turned a corner and I saw some houses with their lights on. I decided to head that way. Like I said, I was done working for the night, and that lady definitely shook me too much to have any motivation left for knocking on doors. But just knowing that there were other people awake calmed my nerves. It's not real protection, but it's a psychological ease of the mind kind of thing. So I was walking towards those houses and already starting to feel a little better when I heard a ruffling in the trees next to me. My heart dropped. I decided to pick up the pace, and to my horror, the ruffling followed me and picked up its pace too. I considered running, but the rational side of my brain took over, and I realized that whatever this was probably an animal. And if it was an animal, it could probably outrun me. So my best bet was to just make myself big and make loud noises to scare it off. I have no idea if this works for every predator animal or not, but it's what I went with. So I got up as big as I could, splayed out my arms with my clipboard in my hand, and I yelled towards the trees. To my shock and absolute terror, the creature in the woods raised itself up too and made itself bigger, and that's when I got my good first look at it. The first thing I noticed was the paws. They were huge, and my first thought was that I royally messed up, and this was a bear. But then I saw the fur, gray fur. Well, I didn't know of any gray bears, so I started to calm down, thinking maybe this was a big dog or something. And then the thing raised its head above the small brush, and that's when I realized it was a wolf. Well, not a wolf. It had a wolf's head, but it also had what I can unmistakably say was a man's body. At first I thought maybe this was some sicko wearing a mask, like in the movie Saw, but then it opened its mouth, and I saw the saliva dripping out of its mouth and the deep shine in its eyes. I knew then that it was not a mask. This was somehow a creature with the body of a human and the features of a wolf. I was too scared to move. The wolf-man creature took one step towards me, and my first instinct was to hurl my clipboard at it. I will never, till the day I die, stop being grateful that my clipboard made contact and hit the creature in the face. It then let out a loud grumble and darted back into the woods, leaving what looked like human footprints behind. I left the clipboard there. I hadn't gotten any donations that day anyway, and I sprinted as fast as my unfit legs would bring me, up near the houses with the lights. Luckily, I had a good signal there, so I called my boss and told him to pick me up early. I think he heard the urgency in my voice, because within 5 minutes, he was there. I never did tell him exactly what I saw. He never asked, but he knew something was up in my body language and the look on my face. I think he knew it was best just not to ask. Anyway, I quit my job a week later. Jacksonville, Florida, March 2007. It was late March of 2007 when I saw it. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. It's just that I've got to share it with somebody. Anybody. I figured maybe if more people knew about it, well, maybe someday there might be some real answers. That has to count for something. It might one day even save some lives. Who knows? Maybe they'll collect other encounters about it. So, here goes. I was just a kid when it happened. We were in the middle of soccer practice. It was a late, sunny afternoon, but nothing too blinding. This was back when I was still dreaming of going to Berkeley. One of my teammates kicked the ball really hard. I started for it, but the ball sailed straight over my head and out of the park, across the street, and into a cluster of tightly woven trees. It was weird it would land there because most of the land around the park was grassy and open. But I just dismissed it, and I glanced from side to side in case there was any incoming traffic. The streets surrounding the park weren't overly busy. I watched as one car, a common sedan in navy blue, passed by. Everybody was impatient for me to get the ball, and so I just shrugged and crossed the street. I could see greenery to my right, and as I jogged across the hot pavement, that's when I saw it. My teammates were much too far away to see anything, but right behind the ball, something was moving. Something big. I honestly thought it was a stray dog at first. Anyone would have if they had seen it too. The dark, fluffy head of rust-colored fur could have easily belonged to a Malamute or even a long-haired German Shepherd. It could have even been a cross of the two, I suppose. I watched as the canine's nose wrinkled up and down, taking in each of the scents of the soccer ball. I watched in fascination as it continued to lean closer, and since I liked dogs, I stupidly called over to it, thinking it was friendly. But that's when it happened. The dog glanced up at me, and it began to stand up on its hind legs. I remember the impossibly long shadow as it fell over me. This thing must have easily been twice my size. Whatever its true height was, I was scared, and I'm not exactly the type that's scared easily. Yet in that moment, I could feel the blood drain from my skin as the dreaded creature stared me down with soul-piercing gaze. The yellow eyes were burning embers of something. Something almost human was staring straight through me, almost like it was judging whether or not to let me go. I couldn't pry myself away. Its gaze was absolutely mesmerizing, and there was a dangerous sort of intelligence reflecting back from deep within its eyes. Something far older and much more mysterious than its furry predecessors. I stayed where I was for what seemed like a long time. There really wasn't anywhere I could go, to be honest. I wasn't sure how fast the creature could run, but I was willing to bet that it was a lot faster than me. I was in good shape. I was a kid, but with legs that long, there was no way I could even stand a chance. The thing's stride had to have been more than likely 2 to 3 times mine, and I would imagine it closing the gap between us in a mere heartbeat. The creature then let out a low, guttural growl. It rumbled out like a curious warning, but it didn't sound anything like a dog should have sounded. It was almost like there were 2 different vocal cords, and whatever that thing was, it didn't like me. Now that was fine with me. I didn't much like it either. I couldn't tell its gender in the shadow between the cluster of trees, but it didn't really matter. I bravely reached out with my trembling arm and I pointed toward the ball. And then I watched as the thing used one of its massive clawed paws with nails, reach out, and gave a mighty swing. The ball shot out like a slingshot. I immediately made a dash for it. As I moved, I kept a close eye on the thing and watched at the same time as the ball sailed high over my head. And then it landed. The ball bounced once, and it shot forward into the grassy area. I was breathing hard as I picked it up, and then in sheer curiosity, I turned to glance once more at the beast. To my great surprise, it was already gone. I scanned the horizon for any sign of life, but there was none. My teammates were now shouting loudly from somewhere behind me, and yet I had not paid them any attention. I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts. Eventually, I gave up on the hopes that I might one day see that thing again. Whatever it was long gone. I hurried and took the soccer ball back to my teammates, where I immediately shared the story with them. They all looked at me like I was crazy. I kind of thought I had lost it too there for a moment. They figured I was just making an excuse for why it took me so long. In the end, I never did see that thing again, although I went back a few times to that same soccer field and looked. Maybe it was just passing through the area, like some sort of a wandering gypsy. After all, I now believe that anything is possible. Though I think the real question is, what does everybody else think? So I was just minding my own business and driving home from where I work. I live just outside of Boston, and I'm a writer at the Boston Herald. It was one of those nights where you could barely see past the windshield. The rain was coming down that hard, and the thunder, man, it was like someone was bowling right over your head. My old car was chugging along, the way it does when it's got one foot in the grave. Then, of course, because my luck is the worst there ever was, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Right there with nothing but trees all around me. I tried the ignition a couple more times, but it was like trying to wake a teenager. Pointless. I had no choice but to call for a tow. While on the phone, I peered out into the forest, right? And I'm not kidding. There were these 2 lights. No, not like car lights. More like eyes. They were too bright, too steady for an animal's, and they were way too far off the ground. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it, and I swear, every time the lightning flashed, that thing, whatever it was, seemed closer. Not like it was moving, but as if the darkness between us was getting thinner. And I'm not usually the type to get spooked, but this was goosebumps territory. The creature, or I guess that's what I should call it, didn't make a sound. Not a growl, not a rustle of leaves, Nothing. It was just watching, waiting, while I sat there trying to convince myself that I wasn't about to star in my own horror movie. Now, I'm not one to believe in the boogeyman, but I'll tell you, the way the shadows played tricks with my eyes, it was easy to start imagining things. And it's weird, you know? It almost felt like it was keeping me company, like it had this presence. Not menacing, but not exactly friendly either. The minutes ticked by like hours, the rain kept hammering down, and the only thing that changed was the occasional flicker of those eyes, like it was blinking or something. Every time the lightning lit up the forest, I braced myself to see it right outside my window, but nope, it stayed put, just beyond the tree line. Now, I'm the kind of guy who likes a good mystery, but I also like a good night's sleep, and this was cutting into that. I kept checking my watch, checking the road, hoping to see the lights of the tow truck. Finally, headlights cut through the night, and I've never been so happy to see a tow truck in my life. I looked back to where the creature had been, and nothing. Just trees and the storm, as if it had never been there. When the truck driver got to me, he must have seen something on my face because he asked if I was all right. I just shook my head and said, "Weird night." He nodded like he'd heard that one before, hooked up my car, and we left. As we rumbled down the road, the tow truck's engine growling against the storm's howl, I couldn't shake the feeling. You know the one, right? Like you're not alone, even when you should be. The cab was cramped, smelling of wet dog and old cigarettes, but it was better than being out there in the downpour, or so I thought. I kept my eyes on the road behind us through the rain-streaked back window of the tow truck. The driver was chatting about the weather, about how it had been a long night full of calls like mine. Nice guy, but I was only half listening. My focus was on the rear view, on the dark shapes of the trees we'd passed, watching, waiting, and then I saw it. In the brief illumination from a lightning flash, there it was. Those same two glowing eyes, high above the ground, trailing us. They blinked once, disappeared, and then reappeared closer than before. "Stop the truck," I blurted out without thinking. The driver glanced over, his brow furrowed. "You okay, buddy?" "There's something back there," I said, pointing. He slowed down, peering into the side mirror, but shook his head. "I don't see anything. Probably just an animal or reflections off something. Happens all the time out here." But I knew better. This was no reflection. This was something that didn't belong to our normal, everyday world. We drove on, but every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of those eyes. Not every time, just once in a while, just enough to make me doubt my own sanity. They'd be a little further each time, until they weren't there at all. The driver dropped me off at home. I thanked him, maybe a little too fervently, and he drove off into the night, leaving me with my thoughts and the loud booms of thunder that kept making me jump. I stood there on my porch, watching the night. It was quiet now, the storm moving away. I should have felt relief, I guess, but instead, there was this hollow feeling, like I'd left something unfinished. Days went by. The storm became just another piece of small talk, and my car? Oh, it got fixed up good as new. And I still wonder, did that creature ever really leave, or does it still linger back there along the road? That's the thing about experiences like this. They don't really end, do they? They just sort of hang there in your memory, always ready to remind you that the world's a lot stranger than you thought. So yeah, that's the story. Not the kind you tell for a quick laugh or a gasp, but the kind that sticks to you, like the chill of a shadow passing over your grave. And every time I tell it, I hope that's all it is, a story. But I can't help but glance over my shoulder just to be sure. It started out like any other evening. I was just heading home from a friend's place, taking the same route I always did. Only that night, it was too still, too silent, like the city was on pause. I noticed it immediately, but just kept walking. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to walk into a night that I'd never be able to shake, a story of my own that I'd be telling for years to come, wondering if anyone would ever really believe me. But believe it or not, it happened. And it all started with a shadow in an alleyway. So I'm walking home, right? It's late, way past when the shops shut down and only the streetlights are keeping me company. I've done this walk a million times, but that night I couldn't shake this weird feeling like static on the back of my neck. It was quiet, too quiet, and I'm just trying to keep my head clear, telling myself, "You're just tired, man." I'm passing that one alleyway, the one that smells like old takeout on the best of days. But this time, I see it, this weird shadow against the wall. I know instantly that there is something wrong with it because I've seen plenty, growing up in a block where the lights flicker and go out 24/7. This shadow, it's like it's alive or something. It moves, not like a person or a dog, just shifting, gets taller, then shrinks down, like it's breathing or pulsing. And along with the pulsating figure, I feel like I'm hearing whispers. They're barely audible, like it could be the wind, or it could be someone talking. Either way, I can't tell what direction they're coming from. Now, usually this kind of thing doesn't bother me. I'm a city kid and I've watched all the horror flicks, laughed at the jump scares. But this made my skin crawl. I stopped dead in my tracks. I'm trying to make sense of it, squinting my eyes, but it's like every time I try to focus, it changes. I'm standing there, trying not to freak out, telling myself there's got to be a logical explanation. There's always an explanation, right? A trick of the light or some prankster with a weird sense of humor. But I can't figure it out. The street's empty, no one around to cast that shadow, and it's too irregular to be something static. The weirdest part? It felt like it was watching me. I know, how can a shadow watch you? But it felt aware, like it knew I was there. I take a step closer, and that's when it changes again, gets taller, stretches up like it's trying to reach the window above. Then, I do the only thing I can think of. I blink a bunch of times in a row, just a regular blink, and boom, it's gone. Vanished into thin air. I rub my eyes, thinking I must be seeing things, but when I look again, it's just a wall. An ordinary brick wall with nothing on it. But that feeling of being watched, that doesn't go away. It's like a cold hand sitting on my shoulder, following me as I pick up the pace and get the hell out of there. I'm looking over my shoulder the whole way home, jumping at every little sound. I only have about 2 blocks to go, but man, were they stressful. By the time I get to my door, I'm a mess of nerves. I'm fumbling with my keys, glancing back down the street, half expecting to see that shadow slink out of the alley and come after me. But there's nothing, just the empty street and the hum of the city. I get inside, lock the door, and just stand there, back against it, trying to catch my breath. My mind is racing, trying to understand what just happened and why that shadow and this night were somehow different. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little creak of the building, every whoosh of the cars outside, it all sounds like the whispers and random footsteps to me. By morning, I'm convinced I need to just forget about it. It's easy to let your mind play tricks on you, especially when you're alone in the dark. But even now, when I pass that alleyway, I can't help but look. I don't go down there anymore, and I haven't seen the shadow again. I'm sure that's also because I've totally changed up my walk home and now go down the next street before doubling back. It's a bit further, but totally worth it for my sanity. So there it is, the weirdest thing that's happened to me. Not exactly your average night, and definitely not one I'm keen to repeat. I also know that it's not the most concrete thing to share as I don't have a bunch of details, but I truly do believe that what I encountered was not of this realm, but from another. Like, from a place that we don't know of or understand. Either way, it stuck with me, and I guess that's why I had to tell you, just to get it off my chest if nothing else. Yosemite National Park, June 2019. My name is Blake, and I want to tell you about an incredible encounter I had in Yosemite National Park. I'd been on a hiking and camping vacation with my family. It was a yearly event for us. This year was Yosemite, and it was a sunny morning the day that this happened. We had started our hike from a trailhead at the base of the mountains. I remember the air being fresh and the sound of chirping birds filling the air. We followed a winding trail that led us deep into the heart of the park. At one point, as we made our way up a steep path, my eyes were darting everywhere. I was on the lookout for signs of animals or anything out of the ordinary. But little did I know that I was about to encounter something truly extraordinary. With all my excitement, I was in the lead and moving more quickly than the rest of the group, by quite a bit of distance, I might add. At one point, I reached a clearing and I started walking towards the center. While I was making my way there, I glanced across the clearing towards the trees on the other side, and suddenly, I froze in my tracks. Standing behind one of the trees, half covered by shadows, about 50 feet away, was a creature that resembled a human, but one that was covered in hair. It was enormous, and as I looked, I could see the face of a dog, and shaggy brown fur, and long, muscular arms. But the creature's eyes were wide and curious, and it stood on two legs just like a human. At first, fear washed over me, and my body felt like it was glued to the ground. But as I studied the creature, I realized that it didn't seem aggressive or dangerous. In fact, it looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. The encounter lasted for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes. We stood there locked in a gaze as if trying to understand each other. As I stood there staring at the creature in awe and disbelief, I couldn't help but notice its immense size. It's all I could think about. It must have been at least 8 feet tall and towering over me like a giant. The creature's body was covered in thick, dark brown fur, which blended perfectly with the surrounding trees and the foliage. Its muscular arms hanging by its sides almost touched the ground. At first, my heart raced with fear. The stories I had heard about Bigfoot creatures flashed through my mind, but as I observed the creature more closely, I noticed that it had a gentle expression in its large, round, dark eyes. It seemed curious rather than threatening. The creature then took a step forward, cautiously closing the distance between us. I held my breath, unsure of how it would react. To my surprise, it didn't move any closer. Instead, it just stood there, tilting its head slightly as if trying to understand my presence. Feeling a mixture of fear and fascination, I decided to take a small step backward, hoping to create some distance between us. To my relief, the creature mirrored my movement, showing no signs at all of aggression. It was as if it understood my intentions and didn't want to scare me away. We continued this slow dance, taking turns stepping back and observing each other. It was a surreal experience, to say the least, like being part of a silent conversation between two beings from different worlds. I did feel a sense of connection, a bond formed through our mutual curiosity, and the forest around us was hushed, as if holding its breath, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and mystery. It felt like I had entered a different realm, a place where mythical creatures roamed freely. Clearly, my imagination was running wild with this encounter. But despite the fear still lingering within me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy. And then with a final glance at the creature, I slowly turned around with my heart pounding in my chest. I then made my way back to where my family was still working their way up the trail. My mind was racing with a mix of emotions. I couldn't wait to share my encounter with them and to describe in vivid detail what had just happened. As I talked, they could see the truth in my eyes. I recounted every detail, From the creature's appearance to our silent communication, they listened intently, hanging on every word. Some were amazed, others were skeptical. But then as a group, we all continued back up to the clearing, but despite all of us looking around, we found no further signs of the creature. The rest of the day passed by in a blur. We concluded our hike as we planned, reaching our campsite just before the sunset. Emotionally, each family member had a different response to my encounter. Some felt a sense of wonder, others felt a lingering unease, a reminder of the unknown that can lurk in the forest. But we all agreed that it was a day we would never forget. And for me, a day that has affected me deeper than I ever could have imagined. Denver, Colorado, 2018. I was out camping with my buddies in the mountains outside of Denver. We were having a great time, sitting around the campfire, roasting marshmallows, and telling scary stories. Little did we know we were about to experience something straight out of a horror movie. It was getting late one night and most of us decided to turn in for the night. But my friend Jake and I decided to stay up a bit longer and enjoy the peacefulness of the forest. We were sitting on some logs chatting away when suddenly we heard a rustling nearby. At first we thought it might be a small animal, so we grabbed our flashlights and went to investigate. As we approached the source of the noise, we started to feel a strange vibration on the air. The air felt heavy and an eerie silence fell upon the woods. And then out of nowhere, we saw it. It suddenly emerged from the shadows, this massive figure towering over us and getting taller with each step it took closer to us. Eventually, it was standing about 8 feet tall, on 2 legs, and it had a muscular body covered in fur that glistened under the moonlight. Its long pointed ears twitched as it turned its head towards us, revealing a face that sent chills down our spines. The creature had a snout that resembled a wolf with sharp fangs protruding from its mouth. Its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, reflecting an intelligence that was unsettling to say the least. Its powerful, muscular frame exuded strength and agility, and as it took a step closer, we could see its clawed hands flexing. Fear gripped us, paralyzing our bodies. The creature emitted a low, guttural growl that resonated deep within our chests. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very core of the forest, sending a wave of primal terror through our veins. Realizing that we were in imminent danger, Jake elbowed me to snap us out of our trances, and we then instinctively turned to run. But the creature was fast. It lunged towards us with incredible speed, and its powerful strides were closing the distance between us. Adrenaline fueled our escape as we sprinted back to the campsite, shouting incoherently for the others to wake up. Confusion and panic spread among our friends as they stumbled out of their tents trying to grasp what was going on. I looked back and unbelievably did not see the creature, but there's no way I didn't believe it was still out there. I knew 100% that it wanted us gone. I knew that it was watching us. Our friends saw the fear etched on our faces and the desperation in our voices, and without hesitation, they scrambled to pack up our belongings, no questions asked. As we hurriedly packed our tents and our gear, I could feel the creature's presence lingering in the shadows. It seemed to taunt us, and I was sure that I could see yellow eyes flickering from behind the dense foliage. Every rustle, every snapped twig sent shivers down my spine. It was as if the forest itself had come alive with malevolence. Finally, we jumped into our cars and sped away from what I now call that cursed place, our tires kicking up dust from the dirt road. The relief we felt upon leaving that nightmarish scene was palpable, but the memory of the creature's haunting presence remained etched in our minds. Finally, in the safety of our homes, we shared the entire details of our encounter with our friends, hoping to find some answers or validation from them. Some dismissed our stories just a figment of our imagination, or a prank gone too far. But those who saw the terror in our eyes, the genuine trauma we carried, they knew there was something more to it. To this day, Jake and I can't explain what we witnessed. We've heard stories of similar creatures, cryptids that blend the characteristics of wolves and humans, but nothing can truly come close to what we feel having seen one for ourselves. Appalachian Trail, Virginia, 2017. So there I was, deep into the Appalachian Trail near the border of Virginia and West Virginia. I'd been hiking for about 2 weeks at this point and was planning on about another 2 if all went well. Now I've been on a ton of hikes, but this one was something else. It was about mid-May and the chill of the early spring was still lingering, especially once the sun went down. But the scenery was breathtaking, honestly, with the mountains just beginning to shake off the winter blues. The trees were budding and the air was thick with the earthy scent of spring. Anyway, I'd been hiking about 5 hours that day when I decided to set up camp near a small brook. There's something about the sound of running water that soothes me when I sleep. It's peaceful, tranquil, or at least it's supposed to be. I eventually got everything set up and was settling down for the night, the fire crackling nearby, when I heard this rustling in the bushes. Now, it wasn't the sort of rustling you would dismiss as a rabbit or a squirrel. No, this was louder, heavier. It sent a shiver down my spine. I remember thinking that maybe somebody else was out there, or maybe even a deer was moving along in its own trail. Sometimes animals can sound larger than they are. I tried not to think about it, but the noise continued, and it continued in the exact same spot, just off the campsite. It wasn't getting fainter or moving along, so I grabbed my flashlight and I headed towards the noise. As I was getting closer, the rustling stopped, but I could feel something. It's hard to explain, but it was like I could feel eyes on me. This feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like I was on display. I shone my flashlight around, but there was nothing to see. Just trees and bushes in the blackness beyond my light. It was then, though, that I heard it. I might even go so far as to say I felt it versus heard it. A low growl. It was deep and guttural. I could feel it vibrate through the ground, shaking me to my core. In the pitch black, I felt a sense of dread, like I was definitely in danger. My heart was racing, and I was finding it hard to even breathe. My mind was yelling, "Get out of there!" But my body, it wouldn't listen. But then something happened. This figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It wasn't just any figure. No, it was enormous, standing on 2 legs, silhouetted against the sparse moonlight. I felt my heart leap to my throat. I mean, we've all heard the stories, right? About Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call it. But to actually see one? Now you have to remember that the light wasn't the best. There was no real moon that night. But when my flashlight hit the thing, good Lord, I could see that it was gigantic. I mean, it was tall, like really tall. I'd say easily 8 or even 9 feet. It towered above me, giving off this sense of pure, raw power that completely overwhelmed me. And it was broad, too. Very broad. Like its shoulders seemed as wide as a small car. No exaggeration. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, rippling with muscle under the hair that was matted and black, sort of blending with the shadows around. Its face, now that's something I will never forget. It was more human-like than ape-like, but still not quite human. Its eyes were large and expressive, shining in the light with an intelligence that startled me. The nose was flat, more like ours than a bear's or a wolf's. And its mouth, when it roared, I could see its teeth and even its breath as it exited its mouth in a slow stream of steam. Teeth were large, and they looked sharp, very sharp. It was a terrifying sight, the kind of thing you would expect to see in a nightmare, not on a peaceful hike in the Appalachian woods. Like I said before, the sound it made was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. There was like a rawness to it, primal sort of power that you can't really put into words. And then suddenly it let out another roar, and it echoed through the forest, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then it disappeared from the light of my flashlight. I swung the light slowly back and forth, trying to pinpoint the thing's current location, but I couldn't see anything at all. Just like that, I was alone again, standing there in the pitch black, heart pounding. That's when I realized that sweat was pouring down from my face and my chest. I hadn't even been aware of what was happening to my body until just then. As I'm sure you can imagine, I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every noise, every shadow had me on edge. I couldn't wait for day to break. So just as soon as the sun started peeking over the mountains, I packed up my stuff and I headed onwards. There was no real place to go but continue at this point. But I will tell you that I cut the hike short. I didn't make those full final 2 weeks. I just couldn't get over what had happened. Now I will tell you that since that encounter, I have been back to the Appalachian Trail since, but never to that same spot. I can't say I'd ever want to see that section of the trail ever again. I have a very unusual story to share with you. I had an experience that was extremely terrifying and totally unexplainable while hiking in the mountains of Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. The incident happened on October 17th, 2016. My wife was attending a conference near Lake Louise for 3 days, and she suggested that I accompany her and do some hiking in the area. Since we are from Eastern Ontario, Kingston, we were not familiar with the area, but did some research before our trip. I decided to hike along the Deception Pass Trail. That first morning, we woke up early, and my wife dropped me off with our rental car where I could hop on the trail before she needed to get to the conference. She expected to be gone all day, with the conference running from 8 to about 3 p.m., and so we planned to meet back at the same spot when she was done. The weather conditions were clear but cool when I started out around 8 a.m. There were only a few people who arrived later, as they were staying overnight closer to the trail. The first part of my trek was easy, going through forested areas until I reached Boulder Pass Junction after about 2 hours. At this point, it became more difficult as there were large boulders and scree fields that needed to be crossed. This was a very challenging area, and I needed to have full concentration, looking down at my feet nearly the whole time, so as not to fall. As I made my way across one particular field, I stopped in the middle to take a break and rest my legs. That's when something caught my eye further up ahead. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out details, but there appeared to be someone lying prone against a rock, and most likely injured given their positioning. It looked like they may have been wearing light-colored clothing or perhaps covered by snow, which would not be a good sign. But what really got me wondering was why anyone would be out here in that position at all. After another half hour of slow climbing over boulders and loose rocks, I still kept an eye on what seemed like a person lying against a rock. However, I never saw it move at all, and began to wonder if it was even a person at all. I finally approached closer, maybe within 50 feet, but then noticed something strange. When looking down the slope from the figure, I could see what appeared to be a small, dark cave. It looked like an animal den of some kind, with fresh snow on the entrance. I was really hesitant about going any closer, But my curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly made my way up towards the area where this person, or whatever it was, lay. The slope became steeper as I climbed higher, and soon I found myself standing above it, looking down. There were two things that struck me immediately. One, the figure was wearing clothing or had fur that blended in perfectly with its surroundings. Two, its head seemed much larger than normal and not proportionate to its body size at all. The thing also had extremely long arms that, from what I could see, extended past the knees. It didn't move or react when I approached within 10 feet of where it lay. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. I suddenly heard a low growl coming from further below, then saw something emerge from the den. My heart started pounding out of my chest as this huge, black, wolf-like thing stood up on hind legs and stretched out to at least 7 feet tall. I realized that there was no chance for escape now. I was in this thing's territory and far from any type of shelter that could help me. Fortunately, after staring at each other for several seconds, the creature dropped back onto all fours again before disappearing around one of the boulders. I then watched as the crouched figure that originally caught my eye also stood up and followed the one that just left the den. This allowed me time to turn around quickly and head in the opposite direction. Were these things unknown cryptids? Why else did they appear human-like? I had no answers, but I quickly made my way back down the trail, feeling extremely frightened and not knowing what I had just witnessed. I was relieved when I reached the parking lot and saw that my wife was waiting for me. I didn't mention anything about what happened on the trail until later that evening when we were having dinner at our hotel. My wife thought there was some good way to give an answer to everything, but she wasn't there. She didn't see it like I did, but she could tell that something had really spooked me. After returning home to Kingston, I decided to do some research online to see if there were any reports of similar encounters there or in any other parks or trails in the surrounding area. That's when I came across your website and decided to contact you with this information. I see you've heard from other people in Canada with strange encounters, and so now, after experiencing this event firsthand, it has opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for me to think about. Thank you for taking time to read my account. Please let me know if you have heard of any similar sightings in Alberta, Canada. I have been a police officer for 17 years. During that time, I have seen some strange things, but this is the most bizarre event I have ever experienced, and it was during one of my first years on the job. I was working a day shift in July of 2008, and we had just come back from lunch when dispatch advised us that they had received several calls about an unusual animal in Trinity River Park here in Dallas, Texas. The callers described it as being similar to a large dog or wolf. Dispatch asked if anyone could check out the situation soon since there were many calls coming in from the park from people who were afraid of this unidentified creature. My partner and I arrived within minutes since we were only about 2 miles away. We parked near one of the main entrances and started walking towards a crowd of people standing around what appeared to be an injured deer lying on its side. We approached several individuals who said they had seen what looked like a large black wolf attacking the deer. They stated that after biting into its neck, another similar animal ran up and joined in, all right here in plain daylight. The scene was gruesome, with blood splattered all over nearby bushes and grassy areas. A few parents were ushering away small children who were crying, while other people just stood silent, not knowing how to react. One witness pointed out 2 figures moving behind some trees across from where we stood. We couldn't see them clearly because it was heavily wooded, but you could make out movement for sure. At that point, my partner called for backup since neither one of us wanted to take on 2 possible wolves alone, especially if they were as aggressive as witnesses suggested. While waiting for backup, my partner moved closer toward where he saw movement earlier. He approached slowly so as to not alert whatever it might be. Just then, one figure emerged from behind some trees, running full speed towards him. As it got closer, you could see something wasn't right with this wolf. It was shaped like a human and looked like someone covering their entire body, including their head, with long hair flowing down their back while running upright. Then, as I stood there watching this unfold and deciding how to react, another wolf thing came bounding through the clearing, heading directly at me. At first glance, I thought maybe these were just odd-looking people, but the speed and agility of these wolves made me think otherwise. Backup arrived within seconds, which I knew because I heard as several patrol cars screeched to a halt nearby. I watched as 2 additional officers exited their vehicles with their hands on their holsters. I shouted for them to stop when they started moving toward the wolves. I knew this might not end well if they came into contact, but as they approached, both animals slowed down, then dropped to all fours. They looked like large black wolves or maybe German shepherds, but something was definitely off about their appearance, especially the heads, which seemed much too big for their bodies. As we stood there waiting for more units to arrive, one of the creatures began sniffing around our squad car, which was parked near us, and its partner walked over and joined in. We decided not to approach, since neither one of us knew what these things would do next. About 10 minutes later, an animal control officer arrived along with several other police units. The animal control officer attempted to tranquilize one wolf, but it had no effect. In fact, both creatures turned towards him after he fired at them, causing him to back away very quickly. The second attempt was successful as the animal control officer hit one animal directly in its hindquarters. It stumbled forward, then collapsed onto its stomach. We tarped the animal and ushered people along who were stopping to try and take a look. The local zoo was summoned and eventually showed up with a large cage on wheels, which they used to transport this creature back to the zoo. Once it was secure inside the cage, it took 5 men. Everyone moved closer so that we could examine this strange being. The first thing you noticed is that even though it appeared similar to a wolf or dog, this creature also resembled some sort of ape-like humanoid. The head had prominent canine features such as a snout and fangs, yet there were distinct simian characteristics, including a brow ridge and protruding ears. Like I mentioned earlier, I had watched this thing run upright without any problems, so you can imagine how bizarre it looked up close. I watched as city workers loaded the deer up too, and all animals left the area. It was obvious that these wolf creatures had been feeding on the deer. A few days later, I learned that the animal that had been tranquilized was destroyed by zoo officials, and an investigation ensued into how they ended up in Trinity River Park. I don't know whatever became of this case, but it still haunts me today, all these years later. And I really wonder why the animal was destroyed without any further mention of it, or a police report of any kind turned in. I have a lot of suspicion with all of this and don't know what to make of it, but I doubt I'll ever hear anything about it ever again. Thanks for listening. I've got a story to tell you about a wild encounter I had while working as a park ranger in one of our beautiful national parks, Yosemite. Before we dive into the heart-pounding moment, let me give you a bit of background. As a seasoned ranger, I've spent years patrolling and exploring the vast wilderness of the park. It's my duty to ensure the safety of visitors and to protect the precious ecosystems that call this place home. On this particular autumn evening, I was deep in the heart of the park, where the dense forest seemed to stretch endlessly. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold, creating a breathtaking tapestry. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive. As I made my way through the winding trails, I couldn't help but feel a sense of tranquility. The beauty of nature never fails to amaze me. But little did I know that this peaceful evening was about to take a terrifying turn. Suddenly, I heard a low growl that sent chills down my spine. It was unlike anything, in a decibel that didn't sound normal. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart skipped a beat. I carefully scanned my surroundings, trying to pinpoint the source, and that's when my eyes picked up on something lurking in the shadows, just a few feet away. I squinted, and I moved closer, trying to make out any details, only to be completely shocked by what I saw. It was like no other being that I had ever seen in the park. This creature's eyes glowed a piercing yellow, reflecting an eerie light in the darkness. Its fur was reddish, dirty, matted. The creature stood on two legs, towering over me with a muscular and imposing frame. We certainly did not have any indication of something like this being in the park during training. The snout was elongated, resembling that of a wolf, but its teeth were sharp and menacing, capable of inflicting serious harm for sure. Its arms were long and muscular, with claws that protruded from its fingers. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was face to face with a creature straight out of hell. And now let me tell you my instincts as a ranger kicked in really quickly. I slowly reached for my radio, ready to call for backup. But just as I was about to make the call, the creature let out a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the trees. I couldn't move. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mythical beast? A legend come to life? Was I really even seeing this? I'd heard stories from fellow rangers about strange happenings in the park, but I never thought I would experience something like this firsthand. As I stood there, the creature took a step closer, with its large paws silently treading on the forest floor. Its long, sharp claws glinted in the moonlight, and I knew I had to act fast. I reached for my bear spray, knowing that it was my best chance of defending myself against this unknown entity. But just as I prepared to use the spray, the creature let out a mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine again. Its eyes seemed to plead with me, as if trying to communicate. In that moment, I saw something human in its gaze, an intelligence and a longing that I really can't explain. My instincts told me to hold my ground, to give this mysterious creature a chance. I slowly lowered my bear spray, and I took a step backwards, trying to convey that I meant no harm. The creature then tilted its head to the side, as if trying to understand my intentions, all while keeping its eyes firmly locked on mine. And then, in a flash, it turned and disappeared into the depths of the forest, leaving me standing there, bewildered and also amazed. I couldn't believe what just happened. A close encounter with a creature that defied all logic and explanation. I did immediately then radio in to report the incident, but deep down, I knew that this was a story that would be met with skepticism and disbelief. And yet for me, it was a reminder that there are still mysteries out there, waiting to be unraveled. My family has been rooted in Oregon for generations. We are hard-working farmers tending to our land. We've been so for over 2 centuries. Our history runs deep in these fertile fields. As for me, well, I've chosen a simpler life, residing in a cabin nestled on the vast property. Growing up, I often caught snippets of conversations among the adults. They would whisper about peculiar creatures that were said to roam these very lands. It was a tale passed down through generations, and its origins were as mysterious as the creature itself. Skeptical as I was, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any truth to the rumors. Little did I know that the events of last week would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew. It all started on an unusually quiet evening. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soothing orange glow across the landscape. I sat on my cabin's porch, sipping a cup of coffee and admiring the sky. The cool breeze rustled the leaves, creating this gentle sound next to the silence. I remember all of this because of how much it was about to change. Because then an eerie sensation crawled up my spine, shattering the peace that surrounded me. A low rumble then resonated through the earth, as if the very ground was disturbed by an unseen force. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. Something was out there. Curiosity and a touch of fear propelled me forward. I grabbed my flashlight and I ventured out in search of the noise, stepping carefully through the property. As I meandered through the nearest fields, the familiar scent of the earth hit my nose, mixed with an unfamiliar musk. It clung to the air, prickling my senses with its strange intensity. My flashlight sliced through the darkness, revealing an eerily serene landscape. And yet the sensation of being watched refused to let go. And then, there it was. Just beyond the reach of my light, a creature emerged from the shadows. Its massive frame stood at least 8 feet tall, towering over me like a mythical giant. The moonlight bathed its glistening fur, which appeared to shift in color, from deep ebony to this shiny, ethereal silver. It possessed the grace of a predator, each movement deliberate and purposeful. Its eyes were glowing orbs, swirling with an otherworldly luminescence. The creature's presence was both terrifying and captivating, drawing me closer despite my instincts urging me to flee. As I inched forward, it regarded me with a mix of curiosity and caution. The creature then emitted a low, melodic hum that resonated in my bones. It was that same sound that earlier had defied explanation. In that moment, I felt an inexplicable connection, this unspoken understanding between us. Time blurred as I stood there, but soon the creature gracefully retreated into the shadows, leaving me standing there alone, awestruck and swirling with questions. So there I was, grappling with the weight of this extraordinary encounter. The memory of that creature lingers in my mind. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions as I tried to make sense of what I had seen. I became consumed with this curiosity to learn more about that creature. I delved into books and online forums. I looked through every resource I could find, hoping to uncover any trace of its existence. I learned that others had encountered similar beings all over the world, but descriptions varied greatly, leaving me with more questions than answers. Determined to find evidence, a few days later I ventured out again, into the woods surrounding our property, this time armed with a camera and a recording device. That day I found nothing, but I repeatedly headed out there and roamed the woods, carefully navigating the underbrush and listening intently. I even set up motion-activated cameras in strategic locations, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. Each night, I would review hours of footage, my heart racing with anticipation. And then, one evening, as the sun was setting, I heard the sound again, the sound that matched the creature's hum. Excitement surged through me, and I followed the sound deeper into the woods. And then, finally, I saw it again, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. My heart leapt as I swung my camera in that direction with my finger poised on the shutter. But the creature was swift, and it disappeared into the shadows before I could capture its image. Undeterred, I pressed on. The creature was teasing me, revealing itself only in fleeting glimpses, and I became consumed with the desire to understand its purpose. One night, as I followed the creature through the clearing, I stumbled upon something astonishing, a grove that I didn't know existed in the forest. And in the center of the grove, a majestic tree. And there beneath the tree was the creature. It looked like it was waiting for me. Its eyes flickered with light, beckoning me forward. I approached with caution, with my heart pounding in my chest. With each step, I got closer until I stood mere feet away from it. Without words, a profound understanding passed between us. It was a connection that transcended language. In that moment, I realized that this creature was not merely a figment of folklore, but a guardian of this sacred land. In that moment, I understood it completely. But soon the creature retreated once again and dissolved into the shadows. But this time, it left me with a sense of tranquility and purpose. I knew that the encounter was not merely for my own enlightenment, but I truly think it was a message to all of us to protect and preserve the land, and for me, especially, the land that had been entrusted to my family for generations. What do you all think? So, I have to tell you about this wild thing that happened to me last June. I was so spooked by the whole thing that I actually put my mountain cabin up for sale. I just can't see myself feeling safe there again. I've always loved vacationing in Colorado, especially the Rocky Mountains. So much of it is untouched, and I'm a big fan of nature. Over the years, I've seen all sorts of wildlife like elk, mountain lions, bears, deer, even a few bobcats. But I've never been scared for my life until this past summer. My cabin is located near a lake in the Rockies, close to the Colorado River. I go there by myself to chill out at least 3 times a year. During the winter, it's a bit tricky as you have to drive in on the rough mountain roads, and they aren't plowed in the winter. I've even snowshoed in a few times, but it's pretty tiring. These days, I tend to just go when I can drive all the way in. So I went up there in June, and I had a great week, bird watching and hiking, listening to coyotes howl at night. And near the end of my stay, I decided to hike a trail that led to an overlook of the Colorado River Valley. It was marked as difficult in the hiking guide, but I was up for a new experience. And boy, did I get a new experience. The trail was a bit rougher than I had realized, overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen trees blocking the way. The amount of debris on the trail made me think that no one had used it for a long time. I got to the first stream crossing and I saw a fawn and a doe, which cheered me up and gave me a second wind. I then filled my water bottle and kept going, knowing I wouldn't find any more water further on. The last part of the trail involved steep rock faces, but according to the guidebook, you didn't need climbing gear. There were enough handholds and footholds that a relatively fit person could navigate the boulders. I passed by a few large flat rocks that looked like a good place to eat lunch on the way down, and I made a mental note for them later. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating, but I felt like a champ, up there above the tree line and looking down at the Colorado River Valley. The breeze felt good, cooling me down, but there was this awful smell carried on the wind. It smelled like something had died nearby. I looked around to find the source, and I spotted a bit of fur visible within the tangle of undergrowth. I walked over to look, and I was shocked at what I saw. It was the remains of a deer. Its head was intact, the eyes still wide open in fright. The legs and hooves were still recognizable, but my stomach turned as I viewed the rest. The entire torso had been ripped apart, and all that was left was a hollow rib cage. I felt sick looking down at it, and I backed away quickly. It ruined my enjoyment of the overlook, so I decided to get away from the smell and climb back down to the flat rocks. At that point, lunch was the last thing on my mind, but I thought it would be nice to sit there and think about my trip. Within 10 minutes, I had descended to the rock field, and I chose a nice flat spot. I sat cross-legged, and I turned my face up to the sun, trying to savor the last bit of vacation that I had. Suddenly, I heard a crashing in the bushes above me. I was startled because it sounded like something really big. I craned my neck to see, scanning the bushes, hoping it wasn't a bear. As soon as I started looking around, the noises stopped, and it was eerily silent. No bird song, and even the wind had calmed down. I tried to relax, trying to get back to my Zen state, but I felt anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to head back. It would take about a half an hour, I guessed, since it took an hour to climb up. I stood and scanned the trail above me once more, but nothing moved. I started my descent. Every few minutes I would hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, and I would stop and wait, holding my breath and listening, but I would only be greeted by silence. I finally stopped and I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded pitifully anxious. I waited, but there was no reply. I knew I wasn't imagining it, though. Something was following me. My heart started beating fast, and I had this urge to run. I tried to calm myself down, but all I could think was, if it wasn't a person following me, then it had to be some sort of animal predator. I was so glad to see the cabin about 50 yards ahead that I broke into a dead run. Immediately, I then heard a snarling sound behind me, and my throat closed with fear. I knew instinctively that the animal that had been stalking me was now rushing to attack. I dropped my pack and I raced for the door, getting inside and sliding the bolt. I ran to the window to look out, and I could not believe my eyes. I've never seen anything like it. My heart started pounding so hard that it felt like my head would explode. The creature was frighteningly large, more than 6.5 feet tall, and it looked like a werewolf. I know that's ridiculous, but it was on 2 legs, and it had the head and the fur of a dog. It was barrel-chested, extremely muscular, with its front limbs hanging low, almost to its knees. I shrank back from the window, feeling so scared and sick like I was going to faint. I heard the long claws scrape at my wooden door, scratching and growling, and I slid down the walls, sitting on the floor, praying that the thing could not get in. I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the cabin next, and a horrible stench like a wet dog began to waft through the cracks in the logs. Suddenly, its head appeared in the window, and I got a good look at its face. It looked like a creature from hell. A dog's muzzle, large fangs like a wolf, glowing red eyes. It was peering in, trying to locate me in the inside of the cabin. I stayed still and quiet, frozen with fear, hoping it wasn't smart enough to break the glass. I could hear tearing noises as it found my backpack, and then silence. I waited a long, long time before moving, my legs going numb on the cabin floor. I was afraid to give away my location if it was just faking me out. Even though I was terrified, I made myself sidle over to the window eventually and look out. The thing was gone. My backpack was in shreds. It was almost evening, and I was too afraid to walk the short distance to where I was parked. So I stayed awake all night with the door bolted, afraid to even go out and use the outhouse. And then as soon as the full light of dawn broke, I made a run for it. Getting into my truck and heading back down the mountain, doors locked, stopping for no one. I haven't been back. I can't explain what I saw, but it has ruined my little cabin forever. I might buy a different place if this one sells, but it won't be in the Rockies.